Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Bath for bringing this important debate forward about women's mental health. And this is an important debate. And as the Honourable Member from Southend West and North Durham indicated, whilst the prevalence of poor mental health for women and men is similar, there is undoubtedly a marked gender difference in the rates for different types of mental illness. As we have heard, women are more likely than men to experience anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder and eating disorders. And we know that young women and girls are at more risk of self-harm. In fact, recently in my constituency, I had the privilege of visiting a mental health charity called Penumbra in Ardrossan, which supports young people living with self-harm, as well as a range of other mental health challenges. Recent reports published by organisations such as the Women's Mental Health Task Force has also highlighted that particular social inequalities faced by women can negatively impact on their mental health, such as having greater caring responsibilities and sexual and/or domestic abuse, or most commonly linked to poor mental health, the issue of living in poverty. So in view of those things, it is helpful and informative to debate mental health challenges faced by women in particular. As the member for East Worthing and Shoreham reminded us, there was a time not so long ago when poor mental health wasn't really something that was talked about. Now we are more enlightened, and there is a recognition that our mental health is as important as our physical health. And when we face challenges with mental health, it is nothing to be ashamed of, and it's right and fitting that it's debated in this House. Our concern with mental health ought not to be a party political matter. We are all concerned about it, but resourcing this illness and safeguarding those who are at risk matters a great deal. And I will, if I may, Madam Deputy Chair, say a few words about measures that we are taking in Scotland to try and deal with this problem, although whatever action is taken, it is never going to be enough to give the treatment and support to these women who suffer from poor mental health, indeed anybody who suffers from poor mental health, that they need and deserve. In Scotland, like every other nation, we face challenges with mental health provision, and I'm pleased that in the face of these challenges, the Scottish Government was the first government in the United Kingdom to have a ministerial post dedicated to mental health, and has invested £1 billion in mental health in 2017-18, with spending on mental health increasing by 3.2% over that period. And with some innovation, I think, it has outlined its vision for approaching women's mental health in its Mental Health Strategy 2017 to 2027, adopting a rights-based approach to mental health which realises the rights of women as outlined in the UN Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Now, the Scottish Government's programme for government set out only a couple of weeks ago pledged to improve existing mental health support for women across Scotland, including perinatal support, women who need more specialist help and women with the most severe illnesses. In terms of pounds and pence, this commitment was part of a programme budget for mental health, increasing by £15.3 million from £70.2 million last year to £85.5 million, an increase of nearly 22%. Of course, in the face of what some people may call a poor mental health epidemic, there is always a need for more resource, and it is the challenge of all governments to work to meet these demands that we face. However, I want to say a word or two about the particular mental health challenges that can affect new mothers, and that's been set out by a number of members present in the chamber today, such as the member for Bath, the member for Lewisham West and Penge, and the member for East Worthing and Shoreham. Now, new mothers and expectant mothers are an at-risk group when it comes to poor mental health, and I'm pleased that the First Minister of Scotland committed to spending £50 million on improving access to mental health services for these new and expectant mothers, which is very welcome indeed. Of course, treating mental health and providing support services to women who live with or are at risk of developing poor mental health is important, but I also want to highlight that it's important that we all understand how much more can be done to safeguard women's mental health in the first place. We obviously need a more joined-up approach, and in Scotland we have CAM services, mental health services for young people, working with schools, and that's very important. But we should seek to deliver better training for teachers as well as GPs mentioned by the member for Thurrock, to deal with and more confidently identify poor mental health in children, we can always do better, as well as, of course, not forgetting to address the mental health of the GPs and teachers who are in the front line. It's also important and necessary, and it would be remiss of me, Madam Deputy Speaker, not to mention the effect of austerity on women and their mental health. We know that they are most affected by these measures. We know this since much research bears this out, for example, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And psychologists against austerity have been very clear that cuts to public services are directly linked with mental health problems, and that women living in poverty are more likely to suffer post-natal depression, and this has been backed up by a study in The Lancet, which found that poverty increased maternal depression. But actually, this shouldn't surprise us. Poverty can be very isolating indeed. If you're living in poverty, you have few choices about how to spend your time. You can't always afford to meet up with friends, or you can't always afford the bus services to access services and amenities in your area. You can't simply leave your home for a change of scene, since you may struggle to treat yourself to a visit to the local cafe. All around, your world shrinks if you're living in poverty. And sometimes finances are so desperate that your world shrinks to simply your own four walls. And this sense of isolation can form a direct bridge into poor mental health. As the Honourable Lady for Thurrock sets out, this also overlaps with conditions like autism, which often lead to poor mental health, since a sense of isolation of any kind has a significant impact on our mental health. And we know that austerity disproportionately affects women, and sadly we also know that single household payments as default for universal credit payments can exacerbate that isolation and loss of any financial control. And the loss of any financial control is a common element in abusive relationships. And I'm proud that my former MP and former colleague for the constituency of Banff and Buchan, Ailey Whiteford, brought forward a private member's bill to ratify the Istanbul Convention. But sadly, this has not yet been ratified by the UK Government, which is deeply disappointing. When we know that universal credit is being implemented in ways that negatively impacts claimants' mental health, then we should seek to do something about that, as the Honourable Member for Bath has pointed out. We know that single parents, 90% of whom are women, are more than twice as likely to experience persistent poverty as any other group. And there are obvious things we can do to better safeguard the mental health of these women. As the Honourable Member for Durham has said, this could actually, in the end, save money. And I sincerely hope that the Minister will be persuaded, in the light of this debate today, to have these conversations, which may not always be easy, but to have these conversations across government departments about how women's mental health, and indeed mental health in general, can be better supported. It's not just about us thinking about resources to treat poor mental health, important though that is. It's also about more thought, more effort, more understanding about what is needed, about what factors lead to poor mental health, and deal with those. And that way, ultimately, we will see fewer people, fewer women needing treatment for poor mental health, which affects far too many of our constituents. Dealing with the underlying causes of poor mental health is not just about what we can afford to do, it's about what we can afford to leave undone.